remember these in order? You remember those? I know what to continue. Oh, so the Gemara says that Saul told me about this Gemara of Ravasa. You got that on tape. Anyhow, he said to me, it's interesting Gemara, he told me, it's the Gemara of Ravasa says that by, where is it, by, I don't know, that's right. It says married, married to Sheva Basa Minodon. Married to Sheva Basa Minodon. You got a few minutes to tell you. Sheva Basa Minodon, this is he married to Tzaddikus. What's the Tzaddikus? There she was Basa Minodon, the daughter of Minodon, a very great son. Finished. The posek is not satisfied. It says Basa Minodon, Achos Nachshoin Lo Isha. He took the sister of Nachshoin, the one who was the hero of the Yaakov Yamsuf, the war of the Yamsuf, and he took her for a wife. Why Achos Nachshoin? Because he investigated to see what the brother was like. Because the children take after the brother of the wife. So that's what the pasuk teaches us, that the first person marries a woman, she should always investigate the brothers, because that's the ones that children take after. So that's why it's the most important. Now, here Lavan said he wants the Jews wiped out. What then? He wants to get the Shalom to convert them if possible, to make Jews like himself. He quickly said to Rivka, Achaisili, you're my sister. You should multiply the thousands, tens of thousands. Because your children will be like me. You can have as much as possible. Have thousands and tens of thousands. This will be like Lavan. This was a bracha. This is some bracha from Lavan. Knowing this Gemara, he said, go ahead, multiply. Have as many Jews as you want, but they should be like the brothers of the mother. Like Lavan, he said, satisfied. This was the reason. Now, what happens? Now, in most cases, majority cases, Nebuch today, the Kalas do not have such tremendous brothers. Not all cases, the Kalas have good brothers. There's a shortage of good brothers today. Very big shortage. So the Takuna was made, very wisely, that for the Badekking, they have the Gidolei Ha'ir, the Gidolei Menachem Shivas take the Chassan, they lead the Chassan to the Kala, and there, these Gedolim say to the Kala, Achaisenu, we now adopt you as our sister. You, our sister, should multiply to become thousands and tens of thousands like us, not like your brothers, because we are not your brothers. We are your brothers, be like us, if you have such kind of Chachamim Gedolim. This is the reason why this whole project, this whole ritual is done with the Abonim doing it. At the altar, where the Chassid goes to the altar. There, this bracha is said, because it's done as a bracha for what? For good children. The very important in marriage is to bring up the Yerushalmi later, good children. And of course, this is ensured the person lives according to the principles, ideals of Rabbi Arizal, that his children will be blessed to be conditioned with the Hayim, punishment with Arizal. And then finally the chuppah takes place, and the chuppah is not where they get married. The marriage is not the chuppah itself. The whole ceremony there, with the ring and the big silver, with everything, with salvi and big silver, everything there, does not make the chassid and kala married. That's only the preliminaries. The final, the final act which makes the chassid and kala married legally is right after the chuppah. The chassid and kala go into that private room of yichud. They're in there for a prescribed period of time, 3-4 hours, 3-4 minutes, 9 minutes, according to many. That period of time, they're in there, in that closed room alone, then they are husband or wife. And yichud is kinda, that Kadesh is three, Kadesh is really the soon, yichud is kinda the soon, and then they are husband and wife. Before going to the chuppah, I gather it is customary for a chassan to put on a kippah, the din says, and also place ashes on the head of the chassan. The din says that this is if a like to show that even at the time of the biggest simcha, we must remind ourselves that the simcha is not complete. Yes, how can we be happy here and rejoice here while the house of Hashem lies in ruins? We must remind ourselves, and by doing that, the Gemara says that he who takes part And like Allah he takes Yerushalmi's mind, the top, the head of the simcha. The person who does that is assured that when it comes time for the Hamas in Yerushalmi will be rebuilt and consoled. He will then take part in the happiness and joy of the simchas Yerushalmi and Binyan Beis Hamikdash Yonah. We should be zeichet to these simchas, the shleimus, life showing with the brachos and schus of Rabbeinu Zohar, Nina Kodesh. We should be zeichet to the simcha koliyas, Binyan Beis Hamikdash Yonah. Yes, Mashiach Tzedekinu, Amen. We continue the din of Tikuney Zohar. And of course, so we forgot to mention that today is a special holiday. We said no tachlan today, and you don't get the impression that tachlan is so hard to say. It's 2 minutes. We wasted more than 2 minutes with different things. You don't say tachlan. There's a feeling of a yontif, a big feeling. You say the halacha. A lot of things change. You don't say Timur David afterwards. You say Shira Malis for benching. The whole day is like a yontif. So we give a big yashikayah to the chosim who came today, and to the Kala who helped him come. Kala who encouraged his coming. He's not here, Kala. Probably going to sleep. Okay, we continue the din of Tikuney Zohar. We said that the din of Tikuney Zohar is different for washing bread than for the Tikuney Zohar in the morning. If you wash your hands in the morning, you wash your hands alternately. First the right, then the left, then the right again and the left, and the right and the left. 3 times each hand, alternately. Whereas, 2 differences, when you wash your hands for bread, you wash them successively, and only twice, not 3 times. You wash on the right once, twice, and then on the left once, twice. As he said, there's a big machlekes in this, whether you're supposed to wash 3 times, twice, or once. Now, a person, if you see people doing it 3 times, you know that there's something, you know that they're doing what is brought in some of the Rishonim for a reason. Of course, the Tara and Mayim. When you see them washing only once, it's also they're misnagdim. They're also kosher. Because one time, if you have an avius, alpidin, the avius mitaheh completely the dime without the water becoming tummy and making the hairs tummy afterwards. So that's according to some. However, of course, it said that Ivan says that in case the hairs are not clean, you must have the first waters for the sake of washing off the hands, the dust on them. The second waters for the sake of purifying. In any event, taking all this into account, the best way is to do what's right, and that is to wash twice on each hand, twice in succession on the right hand, and twice on the left hand, even if you're a left-handed person. Now, when you do that, you finish doing that, then you take both hands and raise them upwards. Make sure your hands are not pointing down, because if the water's on top, if they go down below, they drip down to the fingers, they make those fingers tummy, regardless of how many times you wash your hands. That's why we say, Su'u Yidechon Kodesh, raise your hands up, Su'u, raise your hands upwards in Kedusha, and make sure that they stay up, and as you pick them up, you rub both hands together. It's called Shif Yadayim. Now we come to the question of the bracha. The saying of the bracha always, the halacha that the bracha must always be said, Oivei L'Asiyosim. Bracha must be said before you do the mitzvah. Which means that since this is called the Tilas Yadayim, you're washing your hands, that's the bracha, the mitzvah washing your hands, so you should say the bracha before you start washing your hands. It would be the logical thing to do. But, since your hands are tummy, you don't want to say a bracha with tummy hands, you'd rather wash your hands first, and then say the bracha. But if you do that, you're not saying the bracha before the mitzvah. So what do? The answer is that, according to some poskim say you wash your hands twice, and say the bracha in between both of them. We're not doing like that at all. Kids are passes like that. Kids are passes you're supposed to wash your hands once, to say the bracha and wash the second time. That's not the minhag at all. The minhag is like we do, wash your hands twice in succession. But then we say that the mitzvah is not just washing your hands, the mitzvah is drying your hands too. The mitzvah is drying the hands, and it's not finished till the hands are dry. So therefore, we are yaitz both days. You first wash your hands, get your hands tahor, and still you say the bracha before the mitzvah is done by saying the bracha after washing your hands, before you start drying your hands. You rub your hands together, then you say the bracha, and then you first begin to dry your hands. You have said the bracha Oivei L'Asiyosim before the mitzvah is done. The person must be very careful to dry his hands well. The Rambam says, the Gemara says that you walk outside, when your hands not dry thoroughly, you get chapped hands, worse than that. It's very unhealthy from the dermatologist's point of view. The skin begins to crack, peel, and of course all these skin diseases come from a person who lets his hands remain wet after washing them. Be careful to dry your hands thoroughly, and of course here you have a separate din. Your hands must be dried thoroughly, not to have any water left on them when you wash your hands, as the mitzvah of Tikuney Zohar. Also, above all, a person should, the Gemara says a person should be careful. If you don't have a towel, a napkin, do not dry your hands on your jacket or on your shirt. Some pull their shirt out and they dry hands on their shirt. The Gemara says if you dry your hands on your clothing, any article of clothing, then this will help you very much. It will assist you and aid you and bring about, forgetting whatever you learned. Now, for some people, it's not so much damage. Very little damage done. But still, even for those who have a little bit, that little is precious. That's the extent of their knowledge. Don't lose it by doing something like this. This is kosher l'shikha, so a person should be careful not to. This is not the only thing, of course. I mentioned if you eat the same food that a mouse eats, it's also the same. Cats eat, it's also the same. Makes you forget. It's separate, but just sure there are other things too that make a person forget what he learned. This is one. As we get there, we'll take it one at a time. This is one thing where a person should be careful for it, because a person should always strive for zikora d'kedusha. Learning is one thing. Remembering is another thing. So a person could work very hard to learn Torah, to understand Torah, but no matter how hard you work, you cannot remember it unless Hashem gives you a special bracha, which proves, Menachem says, that you must be mekasher Torah to tefillah. The only way is learn Torah and then tefillah daven, but you should be zeichet to remember what you learned, because to remember it is siyata d'shmaya. It takes help from heaven. This is only achieved by tefillah. So let's follow that we learn first a lot, then we're zeichet to remember what we learned, because if we remember everything we learned, even if I recall what I said in the past years, so if we should try to still get that done by, of course, reviewing what we learned first, and then by tefillah too. We should be zeichet to the Evnei Hashem Yemes with Torah and tefillah. We should be zeichet to see the Biyaskel saying maybe amen. We continue the halachas of Netilas Yadayim for bread. As we said, the washing of the hands, there is a machlekes. You wash 3 times each, twice each, or once each. All admit definitely that once is enough if you have an avius. That means if you pour a full 5 ounces in each hand, then certainly you will yetzer with only once in each hand. However, most posek say it is better to wash twice on each hand, because you have to wash off first the dust, clean the hand, and then to wash a second time to purify the kedusha of the Netilas Yadayim. So this says that if after a person has washed one hand, this is a very important thing, because it's very common that people are nichshal. In fact, if you stand by and watch a long line of people wash their hands, you can tell, if you're alert, you can tell how big a Talmud Chacham each one is, or how small an Aharon he is, by the way they wash. First place, most important here, it says you have to watch out that once you wash your hand and the other hand is dry, the dry hand is tamei, the wet hand is already become purified. But there's water on that hand, and water is becomes tamei very quickly. So if in putting the cup down and switching the cup from one hand to the next, meanwhile one hand touches the other, the dry hand touches the wet hand has become tamei again. So you must now dry the hand completely and then wash it over again. Same thing holds true if this also happens too often. The person finishes washing, has both hands already are wet, are pure, and then the next person about to wash takes the cup from his hand, meanwhile just brushing his hand lightly, ever so light. Doesn't he have to crush his fingers? Slight touch with his hand makes his hands tamei again. So these two things you have to watch out for. When washing, watch both hands. They should not make any contact. It's like 2 wires making contact, you have an explosion of tulah. Secondly, when your hands are still wet, going for a towel, see that nobody else touches your hands. So protect your hands like fire. Third, don't tease anybody by touching his hand after he washes. That's not Now, in case a person washed his hands and somebody inadvertently did touch his hands, and he already had said the bracha, he's got to wash his hands over, not to repeat the bracha again. Okay, so you have that clear. If the bracha has already been said, you do not repeat the bracha. If it has not been said yet, you have to say the bracha, of course, but you must wash over again if either you yourself touched your hand also called Tevilas Yadayim, which means that just as much as a whole body can become toher through going to a mikveh, and surely the hands too can become toher going to a mikveh. So a person could, instead of washing his hands with a cup and so on, he could dip his hands into a mikveh, and just dipping alone once, well, this surely doesn't need more than once. Just one dip into the mikveh makes the hands pure. Same holds true with a river, dipping into a river or an ocean. And here we have a very special din, which I've noticed in my experience, that many people who have learned this din have not understood this clearly. I would say the vast majority have been mistaken in this halacha. Halacha which says that if water is unclean, if water is spoiled, if water is not fit for a dog to drink, that water cannot be used for the Tilas Yadayim. Water which is salty and so on cannot be used for the Tilas Yadayim because it must be fit to drink. Not too clean, but at least fit to drink for an animal. Now, if water is filthy, really filthy, or if water is salty, then of course a dog would not drink that water. And therefore that water cannot be used as posek for the Tilas Yadayim. This of course is a halacha. But this is the reason why some people mistakenly think that you cannot do Tilas Yadayim in the ocean, because the ocean is salt water, only the sweet water river. This is a mistake, because it is true that you cannot take the water from the ocean and use it for the Tilas Yadayim. That is true, but you could do Tilas Yadayim. Tefillah does not require water that is clean or unsalty. The Tefillah does. This is the mistake. We have to know the difference, the difference between these two. To wash your hands with Tilas Yadayim, you must have water that's fit to drink. You table your hands in water, Tefillah, as long as the water is the right kind of water, river water, mikveh water, ocean water, but it doesn't matter how salty or how unclean it is. And if you want 100% proof to this halacha, you go to any Me'eshar mikveh, you'll see that there's no halacha of clean water there. So too, if the water is salty, unfit to drink, if it is as tefillah, whether the entire body or Tilas Yadayim, water is kosher to the entire Yadayim and tefillah. We should be zeichet to retire ourselves. Yeah? What? If the person dips his hands in the mikveh, so the bracha is still on Tilas Yadayim. Some cases where you say al Tilas Yadayim, but this case the bracha is on Tilas Yadayim. Because we have to purify ourselves, be honest, retire our hands, our heart. The Arizal states in St. Leaders, a person purifies his hands at all times, automatically purifies his heart too. So if a pure heart, a heart that is leiv basar, which means only to serve, it's like serving Hashem. We continue the dinner of the Tilas Yadayim for Suda. The thing is that the mayim, the water for the Tilas Yadayim has to be pure, perfect. So if they are spoiled, if they are dirty, not usable, they are posek. Also, if the water has been used for any purpose, that water loses its kashrut for the Tilas Yadayim. But so therefore, a person whose hands are tummy, let's say that many places they have a barrel of water, or like the weddings, they have a big pitcher of water from which they draw the water to wash with. A person whose hands are tummy, who sticks his hands into the water, I got a pitcher of water, his hands touch that water, so the water does not become tummy. Even though his hands are tummy, it does not make the water tummy by touching it. That's a very big finish. It's a very fortunate item, because many times people put their hands in the water, and you figure that that's the end of that pail. The water does not become tummy. But if he put his hands inside to wash his hands and cleanse his hands, even for a second, to wash a finger off, a whole barrel becomes spoiled, because Halacha, work was done with that barrel of water. You be careful not to use the water which is being used for washing hands. Now, of course, as we said, if it's touched though, it's important to finish to know that the water is not going to spoil it. The person has to see to it that there's no chatzitza, separation between his hands and the water. Just as a person going to the mikveh should have no chatzitza in his body between his body and the water, so too by the Tirsa Dayim. Therefore, he's got to remove any dirt on his hands. And surely, the person has to take off rings. Men don't wear rings, or shouldn't wear rings. Women have to be aware of that fact that they're not allowed to wash the bread with rings on. With a ring or with many rings on today, nowadays they go through a process longer to remove the rings than to do the whole washing. So that any kind of a chatzitza between the hands, fingers, and water, makes possible the Tirsa Dayim. Now, chatzitza could be in two more ways. It could be that a person writes with a felt pen, a pen that leaks, and he gets ink over his hands. So a person gets any kind of dye, paint over his hands. This paint, this ink is a chatzitza. This chatzitza is a chatzitza if the paint is still, paint or ink is still in the hand. If you wash it off well with soap, there's nothing on the hand itself except the absorbed coloring inside the skin, that is no longer a chatzitza. However, it is a chatzitza still if the whole hand is covered with it. Holding, of course, the majority. The majority of the hand is covered with this, then there's a chatzitza. A little drop of paint to a little drop of ink is also chatzitza, unless the person feels that his type of work is to paint or to write tefillin. By the same Torah, he's accustomed to having his hands filled with this paint. For him, it's not considered chatzitza. Of course, he's not makbid on it. Now, the same thing too. If a person has, that doesn't happen too often. What does happen very often, it shouldn't happen, is if a person has a kind of a cut, a wound on his hand, his fingers, where he has a bandage or a band-aid, any kind of a covering in his hand, which is a chatzitza. So, in this case, it's very important to note, it comes in handy to know, that if the band-aid is difficult to take off, if you can remove it easily, it's a bandage which can just be slid off and on, it must be taken off, of course. But if it's on with adhesive tape, you can't just take it off and on, and you are allowed to wash the hand exactly as though the bandage wasn't there, which means you must pour water over that bandage. The whole hand must be poured water over. The bandage is not considered a chatzitza at all. Whether it's the smallest part of the hand or the majority of the hand, it makes no difference. It is not considered a chatzitza. Well, this again means that the person should be careful to see that nothing should separate between his hands and the water, between his hands and purity. So Menachem says this means that because you have no chatzitza between himself and kedusha, do not allow the chatzitza separation. That separation, of course, Menachem says means the Yetzirah, the Satan. Don't let it get in the way, blocking your attachment to the tzadik, to Tereg and Hashem. You should be zeichet to remove all mediyas, all chatzitzos, zeichet to be cashing ourselves the emes, the Arizal, to the tzadik, Tereg Hashem. You should be zeichet that zechus to see the B'yas Moshe Feinstein. You make sure. Amen.